Actually, we did get you on to talk about violence in the GAA, and it was the Downpatrick game in particular where there were people vaulting over the touchline that really looked exactly the same as Khabib vaulting into the crowd after the fight at UFC. So you've got a bunch of ideas, and we can sit the sidebar back up in a minute so there you see the vaulting over, and it's just like, it's not a million miles away from somebody jumping into the crowd. It's just, this is the local version of what's happening in the MGM grounds. And it is uncomfortable for people to draw any parallels here, but there's a lawlessness about these games that we're seeing maybe more often because of the fact that people have camera phones at them, and maybe this was always there in Irish life, but the fact we've just discovered it doesn't mean that we shouldn't think that this is something that we need to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I would be uncomfortable enough, making that distinction, or that kind of cross between UFC and what happens in a county down club match. But I do take the point. One of the things, and looking at that video in particular, one of the things that you see is absence is the ball. The ball isn't there. I mean, it's nothing got to do. It's off the ball. It's actually off the pitch as well. And I think my general thing on this, and I've been saying it for years and years and years, is that when you look at those, just at first instance, I'm not accusing any individual, but all the aspects of a criminal assault are made out. Okay, and that's what we've got to. Just because you're wearing a jersey, just because you go to play a game of ball beyond the touchline, doesn't mean that the criminal law does not apply. It certainly does. And we have seen examples in Ireland of it applying. And also, one of the things that people need to remember as well, that if you punch someone else on the field of play and you injure them, no insurance will cover you for that. If that person is injured and they require dental work or jaw reconstruction, you may be personally liable. Okay, and we have a litigious society, and it's going to come to that, where people go, I got my jaw broken in a GAA football match. I'm missing 6 weeks of work. My club insurance doesn't cover it. Well, I might be tempted to go on a civil action, and we've seen it in other sports. The example I always give is, ice hockey was pretty lawless in the 70s and 80s. And then we had a big punch up in 2004. A guy called Steve Moore got a punch in an NHL game. It's a very famous example. Criminal investigation, huge civil action. And eventually, police and prosecutors said to the ice hockey authorities, enough. Enough at the elite level, enough at the lower levels. These are criminal assaults. Either you deal with them or we will deal with them. And I think we could be coming to the stage with the GAA that's where we're at. When one of the things I always hear about this is, don't worry about it because the victim will have to press charges. The victim doesn't have to press charges. The police can intervene if they so want to, or the GAA could refer matters to law enforcement if they felt it was serious enough. And I had a bit of a smile. I don't know, did you see the NFL game, the Patriots? And it was the Kansas City Chiefs. And one of the Kansas City Chiefs players scored a late touchdown, and one of the Patriots fans threw beer at them. And banned for life from the Patriots, charged with public disorder by the local police. You see in GAA, a supporter would reach across the fence and punch a player, and we'd all laugh if he talked about a criminal sanction. Well, maybe we're coming to the point where, if the GAA isn't going to act, well, then maybe the courts will. And that's what we want to avoid.
We do want to avoid it, but we also want to get to a point where people go to play sport. The McGeaney quote at the start of Off the Ball, if you want to box, say, when I box, my box. Like, do most senior footballers really go to matches with the intention of boxing? And, what? There seems to be a cultural tolerance for it.
No, I mean, last week Tommy Martin in the Examiner had a good piece about the fight in the schoolyard and all that, but the one thing I thought he left out was, for some of us who didn't engage in the fights, but we almost had to go to see the fight. Most of us didn't want to, scrap. Most of us just wanted to play ball, and I think that is the case. But I also think it's the case that people, and we've seen it in the GAA all the time, they say, the referee wasn't great. There were so many yellow cards, a fight was inevitable. Or, there are other background reasons why, or the GAA disciplinary things aren't consistent enough. They don't make you punch someone else. that's, you do it. And I think there is an element of personal responsibility. But I also do think that one of the things we should look at is we tend to engage with fines in the GAA, which I think is meaningless, because it's GAA money. It's GAA money that circulates. So I don't think fines are. And we go after individual players, that's fine. Why not have kind of suspended sentences, so that in a way that if you violate or commit an infraction again, the suspended sentence commence? Or why don't we go after the club itself as a whole? I think that's an important, that, for example, where a club reaches a certain amount of yellow or red cards in a season, and then a club-based sanction kicks in. I mean, one of the things I hear all the time from the GAA is, well, there are thousands of matches that occur and nothing ever happens. That may be true. Well, reward that good behaviour and punish the bad behaviour, and do so in an open and transparent manner. That's an idea. But there are so many other ideas. And I think I just saw that Irish News article today, and the quote, I think it was from Alan Milton, and, GAA authorities will not intervene. And, I can see why they want to give due process and all that. And I suppose the first thing is to say about that is the GAA rulebook does everything. It does everything with procedural fairness. I mean, every single element of procedural fairness is there, sometimes so much that we distract from what actually happens, and that's one thing that we need to look at. Get the rulebook needs to be clearer and more definitive. It's all over the place at the minute, and there's no doubt about that. Just even look at the different types of infractions, there's subclause and this and that. You can clear that up, and I think they are doing that. The one big thing I would think is, and Anna McGinley picked up on it as well, is centralise it. There are some things in the rule book that are serious offences, assaulting a referee or disrupting a match so it has to be ended prematurely. They should go directly from the county board to central authorities. Not because we don't trust the county boards, it's nothing to do with that, but to make the point that we take assaulting a referee very seriously as an association as a whole, and that you have to come up and explain yourself in Croke Park as to what you did. And I think that's an important statement. It's a very small rule change, but I think it could be effective in that general way.
There is also the other element of this, and I don't want to sort of trivialise what happens before the actual violence that we've seen in these games, but Mark O'Shea touched on it in the Mail on Sunday at the weekend, where he spoke about the sledging that goes on, and he witnessed one club county championship match down in Kerry recently, where an inter-county player was sledged right in front of his face by a young up-and-coming player. The referee overheard it. It wasn't a great use of words, apparently. It was actually quite bad, and the black card wasn't used in that situation, which is one of the reasons why the black card was introduced, is to get people who are sledging off the pitch. Now, in your view, do you think that should be kind of implemented in in a more harsh way, I guess, because ultimately, in a lot of these cases, it is the sort of spark that lights the dynamite when it comes to these brawls, that there is something said, there is a bit of sledging going on without justifying the reaction. This is an example in many, many cases.
Yeah, I would think that. And one of the things, just looking at those new rule changes, like I'm not going to say anything about the playing rule changes, they have to be tried, but I thought the one on the sin bin, I was just thinking, you have to get 2 yellows before you get a sin bin. I mean, I would call that the venial sin bin. You really have to sin before, you can actually. And ladies Gaelic football have the ordinary sin bin, whereby, 10 minutes in the bin. And I think something like that takes the heat out of a lot of situations, instead of this accumulation of yellow cards. Referees seem to be reluctant to use the black card. There's an accumulation of yellow cards. And I know from playing matches myself, it builds up and it builds up. But if you sin bin them for 10 to 15 minutes, that might help. So I think that on-field thing helps as well, because also with a sin bin, you're punishing the team as a whole. They're down for 10 or 15 minutes. The player is coming off, he gets the death stare from the manager, and the message gets across, But also, I think you can also experiment a little bit with underage matches as well. You can be tougher with underage matches. And one of the things, I think you've covered it as well, is a lot of this is coming from poor sideline behaviour with parents and with kids. They start mouthing and slobbering at referees, and that it builds up and it builds up. And I think really, the GAA has various other mechanisms. I think it has a big forum for healthy clubs coming up soon. Well, a healthy club is a disciplined club. and you start right there. And, if you mouth to the referee, it's a penalty or a free kick immediately to the other team, and it's moved up. You start right at the bottom there, and I think that would help as well. So both on field and off field, and then just you can tinker with the disciplinary process as well. When
you're saying that you understand that the GAA obviously don't want to intervene with due process in the current cases, I totally understand that. There's no point in them now saying we're going to make an example of this one club, because that ends up getting overturned on the basis of all sorts of rules that are in the rule book. What they do need to do, though, is essentially say, we take this very seriously, and we've decided that collectively as an organisation, somehow we are going to affect change so that the scenes that we're seeing this year won't be repeated next year and won't be repeated the year after. Because otherwise, this just becomes a video on a loop.
Oh no, it does. I was looking back over doing some research for the Examiner article this week, and I've kind of written about the same theme for nearly 10, 12 years now, and it's usually predicated by some violent event or even some criminal action. And one of the things that frustrates me about the GAA, and I do care about it very deeply, one of the things is, in January, you'll have a debate about why do we have all these pre-season competitions? And then it'll go on to, well, does anyone take the league seriously? What about the fixtures? It always follows the same pattern. And around this time of year, we always have the club violence thing. There are simple things you can do about it. You can do about it by centralising some of the disciplinary things. You can do it with the sin bin idea. And there are other ideas that you can, but you need the will to do them and do them now. We actually have in the GAA lots of disciplinary bodies, and every provincial council has separate disciplinary bodies that are underutilised. They could be used to step in from time to time. And also, I've been saying this for years, but the GAA is an unusual organisation in that I did a lot of work actually for the FAI and their appeals body. They have a central full-time disciplinary unit. It's small. GAA doesn't have a central full-time disciplinary unit. And, maybe we could do with that in terms of prosecuting these serious cases, but also getting the message out to county boards, etc., that we need to clamp down.
And writing the rule book so that the rule book is based on, okay, anytime we've tried to prosecute somebody under this rule, they get off on this technicality, we're changing it so that technicality gets closed. It's like a living organism that learns and adapts.
Yeah, it's like a tree ring. We keep adding, layer on layer onto it. Now, there's some really good people within the GAA who can do that. Liam Keane, for example, who's been there. They're very good people. But you almost need to start. I think the GAA rulebook is something like 260 pages, double-sided, singles. It's a huge rule book. And of course there are going to be loopholes in it, but there's also another side to it. Is when are we going to start accepting these type of bans as well? We talk the talk about it, but then immediately when it's one of our own club members, we're in there searching for a loophole. So there's that as well. But yeah, definitely clarify the rule book, make it about the substantive issue, and render those procedural issues secondary.
Jack, great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us this evening.